Welcome to TeamTalk from TeamKinetic, the podcast that takes a deeper dive into volunteer management with me, Chris Martin. Okay, so today I'm joined by Ruth Leonard, who is the chair of the Association of Volunteer Managers and is the head of volunteering development operations at Macmillan. Thank you for joining me, Ruth. It's lovely to see you.
Hello.
I guess we should start by saying me and you know each other a little bit anyway. So hopefully this conversation should be nice and easy. But for anybody that does listen, me and Ruth have worked with each other for a little while now. We do know each other a little bit. So if it feels like we're talking about things that are a bit pally, then please excuse us from the start.
Many AVM conferences. And
exactly.
Also, I want to say we're really pleased, AVM, that TeamKinetic is our first corporate sponsor. So thank you so much for that last year.
We're very chuffed to be involved, and it really fits in with our corporate goals to see the sector and the infrastructure elements of the sector become stronger and better support, if you will, the career pathway for volunteer managers, which is where we're going to start today's session. One of the ambitions of this podcast is to take a deeper dive into volunteer management and get to know some of the people that have made volunteer management their career. So I guess we're going to start right at the beginning with you, Ruth. We'll start at the beginning of this story. What brought you to the sector? What made you decide that volunteer management was the career that you wished to pursue?
Probably like most people, it was never actually that's what I want to do when I grow up. What I did want to do when I grew up was to be Kate Adie and to go into reporting and journalism.
I could see you doing that.
With a flak jacket on.
Yeah.
So after I finished my degree at university, which was in philosophy and English literature, so what else are you going to do? I started looking to go into editing and journalism, but was finding it quite a challenge. So I started volunteering at a national charity. I wanted to volunteer in their press department for obvious reasons, but they had an opportunity in their volunteering team. So I started volunteering in their volunteering team and never looked back. I loved that excitement of being able to be with people who are making a difference. And it felt like making a difference in that similar way of telling stories in a journalistic way.
No, now you've told me that, it does make sense. The way you work is very much around creating a narrative, and when I've seen you present at the various events, it really does make sense now you've told me that. So that's quite nice to understand that. And then obviously you found your way into the industry, so to speak, and into the sector. Can you tell me a little bit about your career progression, your career pathway? Because it's one thing to be managing maybe a small team of volunteers and maybe starting as a volunteer yourself, but to end up a role at one of our biggest charities, one of the UK's biggest charities, one of the most well-known charities, and a significant role when it comes to volunteer management. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey from sort of there to where you are now, and what you think helped you on that journey, and how you sort of navigated that world?
Yes. So from volunteering in the volunteer team, when there became a vacancy for an administrator in that team, I went for the job and I was successful at getting the job. I really thought I'd blown it because it was my first real career opportunity. I came home for the interview and I cried because I didn't think I did it. And then when I heard I did get it, I cried again. So that was my first opportunity, lots of tears.
Yeah.
And I became the administrator in that team. And I think one of the things that really helped was there was a group of people around me who was wanting to develop everybody. I mean, volunteer managers want to develop volunteers, but they're also really keen in being there for other people within their team. So there were lots of opportunities where people could see, yes, she can do something. So I started taking on other roles at the time, still within the remit, but looking at opportunities we could get into, overview and scrutiny committees where volunteers could be part of it in local authority. Sorry, I'm going jargon now. I'm just trying to remember.
No, that's okay. No, that's all right.
And then there was a chance within the youth team of that organisation to support some of the volunteering on holidays. So I got involved in that, which then led to the next stage of going to Cleft and Palate Association, which was looking for a volunteer coordinator to bring things together. And that because of some of what I'd learned in the volunteering team and because of some of the experience at working with young people, I think that put me in a really good position. That was an interesting opportunity because I was actually asked to come on the recruitment panel for people to. That's how I got into CLAFA. I was asked to come onto the recruitment panel to see whether we could find somebody appropriate. But I just think during that meeting, it was like, oh, I'm really interested. So
it should be me that's here rather than the panel.
Yeah,
I shouldn't be on the panel. I should be in front of the panel. No, fair enough. And I guess my question really then is, when you started down this process, was there a pathway? Was there a career pathway? Did you think within volunteer management? Did you see it as a career, or was it merely sort of going to be a job to the next job? Do you think that even now, do you think there's a career pathway for volunteer managers?
It certainly didn't feel like it at the time. I mean, I think it was lots of, oh, that looks like a logical next step, and I'm lucky to see that opportunity. It didn't feel like I want to aim to be a head of volunteering or a director of volunteering. It was more of that's another interesting next step. I think it's becoming more of that clarity. People have something to aim for, but I don't think it's necessarily yet as easy a progression. And that's certainly something I'd like us to be able to offer.
And maybe it's almost a side effect of the way volunteer managers are, in the sense of they are looking at other people quite a lot of the time, and it's less sort of egotistical as a career pathway. That people are very much in it for the sense of fulfillment that the job gives. It's not necessarily a career-oriented profession from it's more vocationally. People that got attracted to it are vocationally attracted to it, I think, because of the sense it gives them of what they're achieving.
I do think that's probably right, but I also think there is more opportunity now to be strategically involved in some of the development, rather than being the lovely person who wants to work with other lovely people. I think there's an opportunity opening up, which is where people might want to go up and say, I want to actually shape some of this and work with individuals.
And my other sort of question is sort of the structural part of the industry, if you will, because you've got the traditional third sector larger organisations that have had volunteer managers and have an understanding of volunteering that is very deep rooted in their organisational structure. But what we see as a software provider is the growth of volunteer management within universities, within local authority, within the more traditional sort of infrastructure part of the sector, rather than necessarily the service providing organisations and the charities themselves. And maybe there's something in that around the role of volunteer manager in these different parts of the sector. I'd be interested to get your thoughts on that, because you started very much in that sort of traditional charity sector. Do you think that do you think if you'd started maybe in a local authority, you may have taken it would have been a different type of career progression potentially?
That is interesting. I suppose it depends on how things were growing at the same time, because there is more recognition now, as in the other sectors, about the value of volunteer management. I suppose there are other things. There's more community engagement, community development areas within local authorities were probably one of those openings that I would have been interested in being involved. There's definitely synergy between those. That is a really interesting question. I like.
Yeah, what we've tended to see, and it might be something again. We'll move on to the AVM stuff in a second, but this within some of these other sectors, volunteering often falls in another job area. So it's volunteering and community, or volunteering and neighbourhoods, or volunteering and employment, and maybe this idea that we have within the more traditional charitable sector, where the volunteering element does stand alone, maybe under HR sometimes, but it is a standalone. How we can build that volunteering element to be a career progression and pathway of its own. What are your thoughts? We'll jump into the AVM stuff. What are your thoughts of your AVM hat with that as an idea? What do we need to do as a professional? What can we do as a professional body to make that volunteering element stand alone and on its own 2 feet? What are the elements we think would help you achieve that as a sector?
We certainly know, I think it came up quite a lot at their conference last year, people are really wanting to have that kind of ability to certificate a program, and that's definitely an area that I think we're interested in exploring. There are also great things that are happening at the other side of the sea, the CVA in America. There are opportunities to already go through accreditation. So I think it's trying to look at how that happens. I think that's really interesting. I wouldn't want to lose any of the spontaneity of volunteer management and how you can grow in a way that isn't so constrained. So it's trying to be that medium. But I do think AVM in the future could be that professional body for groups or who want to follow a particular discipline. So we have CIPD for HR and training, and we have Institute of Fundraising for fundraisers. And I would like to see AVM being that place that people were able to see along their journey, help them to get started.
I could see a Royal Charter in the near future. That sounds like the Royal Association of Volunteer Managers. I think it's got a nice ring to it. I think that could be quite nice. Getting invited to the palace every year would be all right. So let's sort of talk then. So you mentioned about you were quite lucky to be surrounded by people that were keen to see you progress. Can you tell me a little bit about sort of some of the mentoring you received, and how, is there any particular examples that you might like to sort of share with us about where that kind of support and mentoring enabled you to to develop professionally and within your career?
Some of the mentoring, if I would call it that, I mean, it's probably more informal than capital M mentoring, but those kind of relationships where some of it was around helping to look for the opportunities and to develop the intellectual knowledge, I suppose. But probably the most important bits for me were around the developing myself as a person to be stronger about what I wanted to. I think I've probably always been really good at speaking on behalf of others. So if I wanted to advocate for the volunteers, to be able to do that. But it's where some of the really helpful people in my career progression have been, were to the ones who point out, you're good as you are, go off and do. And there was when I was at Samaritans, there was a really great member of staff there who was almost a complete opposite. I'm introvert reflector. She was a extrovert activist. Mm-hmm. And she always used to say, and I still remember it, that if we were spliced together, we would be the perfect human being. I think that recognition that what I was bringing might be different from what others were bringing, but actually it added to that whole. So that's been a real powerful recognition of my strengths.
You know what? I think it's quite an interesting one as well. That there's a gender element, I think, to people's confidence sometimes to go and speak out. And I think if you look at the number of male volunteer managers to female volunteer managers, there's a lot less male volunteer managers to female. But I think when you look at their representation at some of the higher levels in the organisations, you tend to see more, and this could be controversial. I may lose some of my male listeners, but I think sometimes, like you say, for that gender, it takes women a little bit longer sometimes to grow into that confidence and develop those abilities and that confidence in those abilities to be willing to put the hand up in some of these leadership situations where it would appear to me that men are a little bit more overconfident in their abilities. They're more willing to take those risks. I don't know your thoughts on that, maybe. I don't want to get you in any trouble.
No. Even if we take the gender element out of it, there is that sense that people wanting to be in volunteer management want to do so because they are doing it on behalf of others. So just having that mindset of helping people along, pushing people along, being that's a bigger leap to say, and me, don't forget me. So psychologically, that might be one of the elements too that I would sign up to, because there are probably plenty of male volunteer managers who feel in the same kind of situation that they can't necessarily.
I mean, I'm trying not to gender stereotype. It's just something I've noticed. Is that you're looking across and we've got some again, to give the right reply. We've got some gents on in the next couple of weeks who I'm sure I'll ask them a similar question to see what their thoughts are. So there'll be a right to reply in there. And I guess this takes me on to the sort of the idea of the AVM's mentoring program and what your thoughts were around that when you set that up, and what you feel that might offer to candidates that get involved. And obviously it's an opportunity to pitch this to anybody that might be listening. So.
Right from the start, when AVM was first starting, one of the things because I wasn't a board member at the time, so I want to say thanks to everybody who got it started, but there was that recognition that being able to be there for others would help them on that journey. So we were desperate to get it started, and eventually we did just a few years ago. We were on to our next round of people. What I think both parties, the mentors and the mentees, get out of it is being able to learn from each other. So I've I've mentored a couple of people through the program, and I think I've got as much out of it as hopefully that those I've been speaking to. So it is about giving a space to think about a problem that someone has, sharing, helping people think about it in a different way, depersonalizing it sometimes, and just giving that opportunity to reflect. And I think it's as much that time as that support element of being able to share when you might have been in a similar situation, and this is how you have to do it. It's been really well received. It's an offer we've got for our members, both to either request a mentor who can come from all around the UK, lots of different professional levels, lots of organisations that they're working from. And
if a member wants to get involved, what do they have to do?
Visit the website.
There we go. Perfect. That's fine. And in terms of the program itself, what does it look like for a mentee? What would they be signing up for? Or if there's someone listening that wants to be a mentor, what does the program look like? Tell me a little bit about that.
There's a brief opportunity to practice some of the listening skills that we can be doing online. If you want to sign up, you get a little booklet and understanding the kind of people who are there on the other side. And so you can work out how you could be matched with somebody, and then you can have a little chemistry session to just make sure that that's
nice.
Good they go.
I like that.
A lot of the matching is happening behind the scenes as well, so that people could help you through that particular process.
It sounds nice. It sounds lovely. And it sounds it again fits in very much with the type of motivation of the people involved in the sector. It's sort of it's built on empathy and listening and understanding rather than necessarily, as we talked about before, certification and hardcore career progression. So I think
a lot of our members are members because not only what they're getting out of it, but because there is that desire to help others along. And that's certainly why I'm going to remain a member beyond my term. I think there's that stage of this is what I want to do, to be there for future volunteer managers.
We're going to come to your term in a second, so we'll park that for a little while. Tell me a little bit then about your journey into the Association of Volunteer Managers. What interested you, and then what took you to the heady heights of the chair?
I was there at that first launch event. I went on with one of my managers at the time. I was at
when did it all kick off?
It's our 15th birthday in June.
Oh, so, brilliant! There we go.
So 15 years ago, which, and that kind of. The launch event was to bring people together to understand what kind of things do they want. And I think one of the real resonant phrases from that is that an association is nothing without its members. So it needs to be led by the needs of the members. And I think that we've certainly tried to keep that going. I didn't actually join the board until about 7 years ago. Life gets in the way.
And what I was going to say, what made you... There's plenty of reasons why you don't do something. What made you actually join? Was it you just asked? Is it a classic volunteer thing?
It was a classic volunteer. I was asked by one of the board members who'd asked me before, and I thought at this time, yes.
Yeah. Okay.
It feels right now to. But I also think maybe there's a bit of confidence going there. Like,
of course.
Who could I be to be on?
Tell other people and be on this board and I can appreciate that.
I've done other trustee roles for very small organisations, but I suppose there was an element of this being speaking for my job, not for my personal job, but my profession as well. So that just felt that's probably what took it a bit longer to
it's a little bit more formal, a little bit more... You have to be informed on the things you're going to say when you're on the board all of a sudden in something that you do for a living, rather than just having an opinion as a trustee on a. I can appreciate that. That makes sense. And you arrived, like say, 7 years ago, and what do you think's happened since you obviously became a board member to where you are now? Tell me a little bit about, what that journey's been like, and what you're sort of proud of on that journey, and where maybe if there's anything that you think maybe we should have done that a bit differently now. Tell us a little bit about that.
I think the fact that we're 15 is telling you something. We went through the early teens of the organisation. And we're not a very nice expression, but punching above our weight in the sense that people think that what we're delivering and offering is being run by a huge staff team behind the scenes, and we're not. We've got 2 part-time staff members who are keeping us all going, keeping it all going, being the face of AVM. That is one of the things that has grown in the last few years. When I came on board, we were just beginning to think about how we're recruiting staff to help with the events at that first point, because we had lots of events and all supported and run by volunteers, and we needed that element. So what has changed is that having that face through staff
professionalisation, so to speak, of the office back end. But it's quite funny, because even as you're saying, it's almost like you feel a little bit guilty to sort of talk about the professionalisation of the voluntary organisation. But I think that sort of demeans the professionalisation of volunteer management full stop, if that makes sense. You kind of need people with those skills to rally the volunteers around to get what you want, to get the results. It's not to lose the core of the volunteers and the members doing it for themselves, but you need some shepherds for the sheep, so to speak. You need somebody to keep everybody moving in the right direction.
Yes. Yeah. So that's been a big thing, actually. When AVM started, it was people who like talking to each other and were there for that, rather than that next stage of now we are becoming a more formal organisation.
And that comes with a whole set of additional pressures in terms of you're guaranteeing income and paying wages and worrying about pensions for people that are working on all those kind of extra things that turn what is in essence a group of people with shared ambition into an actual organisation that has responsibilities. And tell me how. Tell me a little bit about the process of that, and then the ambition of where you want to take that next. Really, I guess is the.
We had a really good relationship with another organisation who was able to say to us, "Look, this is a big risk you're taking to the next stage. What can we do to help you?" In effect, we didn't need any financial help. We were lucky enough to start being able to explore other ways of income. So rather than solely individual membership, we started offering an organisational membership offer. We started looking at pricing structures. So we've been able to make sure that we keep going. I was a bit worried. Sorry, Joe. A couple of years ago when we had COVID hitting us, and how would it affect us?
Yeah,
and it's been
we're still there. Touch wood.
Going well through that. So
this isn't Joe's first time hearing this, is it? I hope that
we have great conversation. Joe. But no, we have been. It's been really. We've been very stable. We've been able to even think about how we're offering things in different ways.
That speaks to the members' value of the offer as well. That that you did ride that storm quite well.
Some of the things that we explored during the pandemic were having opportunities for our members who were being furloughed, because that was incredibly stressful, and that was led by one of our board members who was also on furlough. So we wanted to keep that a very safe space. So we were able to actually, people getting more digital, using a lot more technology in their day-to-day communications, able to open up a lot more and to be there. So there's been positives. I hate to say we
won't talk about the new website just yet. We'll save that for the big announcement. But and then moving forward, then tell me what the ambition is with the AVM.
So
your ambition, rather than the AVM's ambition, what's your ambition with the AVM? Because I think that's maybe more interesting for the listeners on the podcast today, rather than the general ambition.
One of the things I'd said to become chair, I stood for election of the board, and one of the things I put in my statement as to why I wanted was because I was really keen on developing partnerships with other organisations and not just trying to do everything on your own, because you can't just do everything on your own. Mentoring speaks to that. It's that whole broader element. So what I want to be able to do is to be working more closely with others who are doing similar areas, because it's been a bit of a grey area, volunteer management, and everybody's got some kind of view on it, and there are other bodies. So it's just being able to make sure that we have better working relationships with others is probably a key thing. A movement of volunteer management.
I like that.
Even of volunteers. Recognising volunteers will give time to different organisations, and people are there in in a professional way in different organisations. AVM is there for volunteer management across all sectors, not just the charitable sector. And I think that's something I really want us to start being representative of.
No, I think that's a great ambition, and again, because we have this slightly different view of, I'll call it the market for lack of a better term. You know, there's quite a lot of fragmentation in volunteering in the voluntary sector as a whole, and then within volunteer management, you know, you've got an organisation for hospice care, you've got an organisation that's working with hospitals, which is separate to the one that's in hospice care, and you've got you guys that are doing overall. And so there is an awful lot of pockets of raising work going on with people trying to represent their groups, without which has probably lacked, like you say, that overall representation, which the AVM has stepped into that gap to try and. So it's really nice to hear you have that sort of that opinion of collaboration and trying to maybe create a bigger tent that we can fit everybody into, rather than having their own little tents in the same field.
Because we could all learn from each other. And there's differences in sports volunteering as well, and house volunteering. And I just think if we were open to that, and I think we are as an industry, if that's a correct expression, open to learning from each other. It's just that sometimes the silos haven't enabled that.
Exactly. And I think volunteer managers naturally sort of move towards people that are doing a similar volunteer management job to them, because they share similar day-to-day problems. So it makes total sense. But what we notice, again, from sort of a sector-wide view, is that you're all kind of having the same problems.
Yes,
if that makes sense. Maybe just in slightly different contexts. But recruitment, retention, making sure your volunteers are enjoying themselves and they're happy and they're satisfied. These are sort of universal concerns that every volunteer manager has. It's just slightly different context that we find people having them in.
And that different context can open your eyes to seeing it a different way yourself, because suddenly there could be a revelation and there's a perfect middle way.
Exactly that. I mean, some of the things we've seen working with some of our hospice customers around, you know, what we consider to be basic care of your volunteer and how you keep in touch with them. They're not doing anything that's overly laborious. They're just doing it consistently, and it makes such a difference to the consistency of return volunteer they get, and being able to share some of those practices. They do some simple things like sending out postcards to volunteers on their birthday, and you know, it's light touch stuff which is signed by the CEO of the organisation. So you know, it's like a personal thank you, which is certainly achievable by almost any organisation, because it's not costing an awful lot to do it, but it has a massive impact. So yeah, that kind of stuff, I think, if you can get those people in the same room more often, you can share more of that practice. It seems like a very noble endeavour for the AVM, that, and we're very proud to be supporting that. So that's fantastic. I guess moving your tenure now. How long have you been chair of the AVM? There you go. I stumped you.
It's about 5 years.
Okay, so it's you've let's take away COVID for a couple of years, because it's almost that I think we kind of have to park it as it was a time where everything went a bit daft, and we kind of, you know, you've got your future there now. What's next for you with the organisation? How do you see your role?
I love chairing the organisation. I love being at that level and being able to help the team. I do think I need to start thinking about the next succession plan for the organisation.
Yeah.
It's not necessarily good to have the same person at that helm for
the classic volunteer conundrum. How do you move somebody on who's done a really good job?
Yeah, I'd rather. I hope so. So I think this is probably the year to start having those.
Okay. Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. Well, you heard it here first on the podcast, though. Moving away from AVM for a moment, and I want to sort of move then to your work at Macmillan and find out, because obviously the AVM is almost like a microcosm of volunteering in of itself, and everything you've just said there is the kind of thing most volunteer managers are having to think about in their own little world. And you've got both your volunteer hat on and your volunteering manager hat as the sort of the chair of the AVM. But moving sort of into your day job, so to speak, and your work at Macmillan, I guess for people that are listening, what does the head of volunteering, what does that entail at an organisation like Macmillan? What's your role there? Could you sort of summarise give me an example of sort of your your average working week, what that's like for a head of volunteering, just the highlights. You have to go not minute by minute.
So my role is to be looking out across and beyond the sectors to think about how volunteering can add value to the organisation strategy, where we could be exploring new ways of doing things and engaging people in different ways to extend organisations' reach and relevance in communities. So I head up the team that delivers service volunteering and fundraising volunteering, but also, and this is where there's an absolute link to the Association of Volunteer Managers, the team that provide the best practice volunteer management support, toolkits, expertise, and the policies, etc. So my day-to-day job will be enabling people to be offering great volunteering experiences to people living with cancer, or being able to be there on an action team and supporting a run or a collection, but also a bit shaping that what is good volunteer management practice and how can we be part of making things work in the future for all those. We work a lot with our partners in
well, that's what I was going to say. For people that don't know how Macmillan operates, you've got your core services, and then you have your commission services where you work with local authority partners and local provider
NHS
partners
trusts and health boards. And
I guess again, for people that maybe don't understand, there's the work you said where you're doing the direct sort of service support work, and then there's the best practice work for those organisations that you then support.
Yeah. So if we, for example, were to fund an information centre in a hospital and they were involving volunteers, we want to make sure that they are involving volunteers in the way that we we sign up to. So we provide that support for people.
There's that consistency of experience for the volunteer, whether or not they're doing it in Glasgow with Glasgow Life or doing it with you directly. Then we know a little bit. We got to know you a little bit last year. So tell me about how COVID was for Macmillan, and what your biggest challenges were, and maybe what the biggest learning was that came out of the experience, and what you've been able to take forward.
Like everybody who was involving service volunteers who were supporting people in their own homes or in the communities, that was a huge having to shut down face-to-face volunteering. It was huge for people concerned, and it was very much painful for the volunteers. I think there was that, I want to go off and do this, I can see that need and I can't do that. So that was a big challenge. But because we'd set up quite a really robust way of enabling that face-to-face volunteering, within about 7 weeks, we transitioned to a UK-wide telephone buddying opportunity. That's due to the fact of all the hard work that had gone in beforehand with the original buddying, but also we were able to involve lots of people from across the organisation. It wasn't just a volunteering team. We brought in lots of people who may have been furloughed otherwise to go on and work on this project. So and at that time, it was an emergency response project. It's been so successful in the sense of reaching people we never had reached before. So we're able to offer support in 45 different languages other than English. So those kind of things that we hadn't quite been able to do before, we will be continuing it, and we'll be merging it into our buddying model, which would include face-to-face and telephone buddying. So that's been immense. And some of the other learnings about how we all worked together, not rather than in our silos, to make it happen. I think that's been informing some of the changes in the structure of the team.
I think this is sort of less volunteering and more leadership, really. But the imperative that COVID created has driven some amazing change. I mean, it's awful, and everything that's associated with it is generally been pretty negative. But the actual drive to make change happen, there's been some really positive outcomes, I think. And I guess it speaks to Macmillan's ability to react, as you just said there, to create a service in that period of time is phenomenal. Just talking with your leadership hat on here rather than your volunteer management hat, what do you think enabled Macmillan to do that? What was because we know of other organisations that didn't respond quite so well, and in certain cases almost crumbled under the pressure of making some of these changes, and lost staff and volunteers through being a little bit more, should we say, less using a razor blade and more using a sledgehammer to make some of the changes. How do you think Macmillan managed to sort of navigate that, sort of, from wearing your leadership sort of hat for it?
I think that fact that we are curious and creative and therefore don't just try to do the same thing all the time, but we say, well, here it's a problem, how do we do it? And start engaging more and more different voices with it. And I mentioned the people from across the organisation, bringing people together from other areas rather than just trying to do ourselves in the same way. I think that's one of the things that really did help that make a change. And the other thing that we're always really keen on is making sure the voice of the volunteer is part of those conversations. So we were able to shape it and support it with involvement from people who had been volunteering in the original way.
How do you listen to your volunteers? What's sort of your method for doing that at Macmillan? Because you have a lot of volunteers and a pretty broad church of people, I should imagine, to listen to. So how do you filter that? How do you get to something that is that becomes useful in informing your policies?
We're actually right in the middle of evolving what we had been doing to something even better, bigger and better. So maybe there's a conversation, that's another point around our involvement framework. But at the moment, there's been a volunteering forum, which is a group of volunteers in different areas who are having the conversations and taking back issues and hearing from us and shaping that. And then they meet. They did meet fairly regularly to be able to explore that. But we make a point of if ever we have a working group on a particular issue, there's a volunteer who is a representative at that board.
So that voice is always there.
We try.
That's really nice. It's lovely to hear, because the bigger organisations get, the harder sometimes these things are to maintain, and it takes a certain strength of character and will to make sure that keeps on. That is always maintained through the process. From if you are now advising a volunteer manager in another organisation, maybe not as lucky as Macmillan to have some of the resources that you guys have, what are your sort of your golden tips for being a great volunteer manager? If you had sort of distill it into a couple of really useful bits of advice you could give somebody that was, it's the first day in the volunteer management job. What do you think the key sort of things, whether you're a massive organisation or a tiny one, what are the key takeaways from your vast experience of being in this world?
Speak to others, and obviously AVM offers that facility to meet and learn from other people.
That's the first one, Ruth. Join AVM.
And speaking to the others also means speaking to the volunteers. So making sure there is that opportunity to hear from people who are affected by some of the decisions that you're making. You meant there's that sense of being able to be emboldened by facts and figures and other people's experiences to take up if there's any kind of lack of real knowledge about what volunteering and volunteer management can do. So make sure that you've got those at your fingertips. But I suppose make sure you enjoy it and you're working in a way that gives your volunteers that chance too.
And I think that's come through very much in this conversation, that you still have a real passion for what you're doing. I mean, you're not in a war zone, you're not wearing your flak jacket, so it's not everything you were after. But I'm sure there's been volunteer meetings where you might have had to wear your flak jacket and your hard hat. As we sort of, we're coming to the end now. You'll be glad to hear we're nearly there. What does the future hold? What's coming down the road for volunteering? And I feel that, again, COVID has been this. It's like a massive spoon stirring the pot, and we're almost in a brave new world where things will kind of go back to being the same, but there's these real opportunities for it to be the same but different, if that makes sense. And I just wonder what your thoughts are of what that future might look like, where the opportunity is, what are the risks, what can we hope for?
I would like it not to go back to being the same. I would like us to be building on some of the great things that have happened. But some of the things that I'm really interested in looking at and exploring and working with is that community space. So making sure that we're learning from some of the more informal volunteering and to enable a structure to continue that to happen, not to be there, but to give people the tools to do that. And I think that in all areas, including an AVM direction, I think that's where I'd quite like to be exploring in every area. So taking some of the learnings from what's happening there and working with people is really exciting. The digital world has obviously opened up a lot of opportunities for people, but I'm acutely aware of some of the exclusion element. Is it something we certainly don't want to be putting people into a position where they can't volunteer because they aren't able to access certain things through that. So I think there's a conundrum there. In some ways, it's opened up volunteering and volunteer management conversations, but in other ways, for certain people, it's closed it down.
For us, obviously as a digital organisation, we've always been very committed to maintaining that hybrid approach that you can allow people to be managed without necessarily having to manage themselves. You give the served and the self-serve element. We think that's really key. We don't see that disappearing anytime soon. We know from experience of having someone like my dad use our system that he's not really bothered about the digital system. It's at most swim a tool that he'll use every now and again in its most minimal form. So we need to accommodate for this continuum of willingness to engage with the technology. But we also know that there's been a massive explosion in youth volunteering. Whether or not they're volunteers or voluntold is still something to be debated. But the digital tools do play to that. There's a wave coming through the industry, if that makes sense, and it started with the youngest people, but we kind of have to have steps in it all the way along that where the technology works for the audience, and that they can buy into it as much as they want to or ignore it as much as they choose to a certain extent. And then your first point, I think, is really interesting because it's something that we've talked about a lot in our organisation. It's almost, we've been moving toward this idea of having a light version of our product that is specifically for that informal pop-up community-driven action rather than top-down. That we can provide a set of technologies that link in with things that they're already using, like WhatsApp and Facebook and these kind of tools, and they can create very quick and easy lists of volunteers and be able to very light touch engage with more informal users that don't have to register, don't have to tell you their inside leg measurement and their favorite color when they were 12 and things like that. That you can just it may be as little as an email address that you need or a telephone number, and you're able to activate those people in a way that gets them positively engaged in their more localized community. And you can do that in a way that is still informal, but gives the organization that little bit of insight they may need to be better informed to deal with. And we're specifically thinking about some of the more marginalized and hard to reach communities, because volunteering when you think of it as a homogenous whole is one thing, but when you start to get down to the community level, it's not that. It's very much people's personal experiences and what matters to them in their localities. And creating an experience that talks and works for them in that space, I think is that. I hope that's the future of volunteering. That's why, because I think that's what's already happening. That's the sustain. That if we can make that more sustainable and encourage more of that, I can only think it's good for those things that are difficult to talk about, like trust and social cohesion. Them kind of things that they're invisible but really important, if that makes sense.
I think that's one of the challenges. First of all, one of the views of the future is that we never have a homogenous whole of volunteering, because that's one of the passions and powers of it is so disparate. But I think that would be really interesting to explore how we get to there.
So we're almost there. I've got one final question.
It's not what was my favourite colour when I was...
No. It's a little bit deeper than that. Have you got any sort of unrealised ambitions left within sort of volunteering and volunteer management? Is there anything left that's on your bucket list that you think I'd like to before I finish in this industry, I'd like to have that ticked off?
So, not necessarily ticked off, because I'm not necessarily a completer finisher. I really like being that starter and that having those conversations.
Me and you both.
So, but that I would like us to be in, well, first of all, in a place where it's not volunteering isn't just viewed as a homogenous and it's like this, but being able to have shared conversations with people where I see immense alignment, such as the community engagement, community development world, and having that spectrum of volunteering, the verb really understood, and being in a place where we can all recognize what it is that people are bringing, and that in order to do that you need people who understand how to bring the best of them, whether they're called volunteer managers or whether they are people who are involving others in different ways. But that nice little conundrum is where I'm getting excited.
It sounds like a bright and beautiful future. Ruth, thank you for your time today. It's been really, really interesting to hear about your own personal development and your thoughts of the future. And I hope they come true. We're here to support you at TeamKinetic. So thank you for your time, and hopefully we'll see you soon.